Hello, everyone. My name is Nahed Mansour, and I'm the Curator of Programs and Education at the Gardner Museum. Welcome to our 3-work series. You will notice your mics and videos are muted and the chat option has been disabled. However, there will be a Q&A following today's conversation, and so we invite you to send us questions through the Q&A function at any point. Please note that this program is being recorded and live streamed through Facebook Live. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that Toronto is located on the treaty lands and ancestral territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Petun, and the Mississaugas of the Credit Nation. The community we work in is the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to learn and live on this land. Today, we are very excited to welcome PJ Anderson as our guest speaker. She'll be in conversation with Sequoia Miller, the Gardner Museum's Chief Curator and Deputy Director. Today, PJ will discuss 3 of her artworks in connection to the theme, Contain. I'll now turn off my video and mic and hand it over to Sequoia.
Hello, greetings everyone. Thanks all for joining us. I'm delighted to be here with the Gardner Museum, and I'd like to invite PJ Anderson. Also, please, PJ, go ahead and turn on your camera. And if you like, unmute yourself. I'll start off by introducing PJ before we meet. Hello. PJ is an early career ceramic artist, originally from Thompson, Manitoba. PJ has shown internationally as a resident artist at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, where she had previously visited as a researcher of Zulu ceramics. She has also shown internationally in China as a finalist in the International Ceramics Magazine Editors Association Emerging Artist Competition, and in the United States at the Wayne Art Center, Pottery Northwest in Seattle, Washington, and elsewhere. PJ has lectured at the University of Manitoba and at the NCCA conference, as well as other locations. She currently teaches at the Winnipeg Art Gallery Studio program and is currently a graduate candidate at the University of Manitoba. And with that, I welcome PJ. Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to be able to speak to you today and learn more about your work. So before we go into the slides, maybe I'll ask you to tell us all a little bit about where you are, like physically, kind of the space you're in, and I've mentioned that you're a graduate candidate at University of Manitoba. I'm hoping you could start by telling us a bit about that as well.
Sure. I'm currently in my studio at school. It's a lovely studio. I'm going to give you a quick look because it's tidy right now, so you can see. Ooh, super
beautiful
and clean for 15-20 minutes now. Yeah, so I'm just finishing up my first year here as a graduate candidate and heading into my summer productions time. So it's when I can actually just make work and not go to classes and have to write papers and whatnot. So kind of excited to just make stuff for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're just finishing the first year of a 2-year MFA program, Master in Fine Arts program. And as you mentioned just now, you have, classes and writing, and I'm curious how that kind of balance of making and sort of academic work or writing or research has been for you.
Well, it's been actually pretty good. Depending on some of the classes, like some of the classes that I've been taking are things like, well, we have our graduate seminar, which is fantastic, where we talk about graduate topics, we do some research, some reading. But one of the most interesting classes that I've probably ever taken was I was taking an Indigenous aesthetics class with Megan Claire. So that was like something I've never gotten a chance to study before, because none of these were offered when I was an undergrad 800 years ago. So it was really exciting. Like I got to read a whole bunch of stuff and look at different schools of thought, different philosophies of thinking and time in the universe that were really outside the Western narrative that I've kind of gotten used to with the whole like gallery and academia. So yeah, it was like a big punch to the face and I loved it.
That's one of the productive punches to the face, so to speak.
Yeah, it was great.
And I think that the professor is well known for this Indigenous aesthetics sort of program and course. It sounds really interesting and like it's really been transformational for a lot of
It was really informative. I really enjoyed a lot of it. Some of it was really hard though. Like I read the anthology of Western philosophy of aesthetics, and that was less fun for me. I I read a lot of French philosophers, and oh yeah, that was probably the least favorite thing I've ever done in my entire life.
Interesting. Wow. So let's go ahead and start looking at some of your work. So I'm going to share my screen. Oops, I'm not going to share that screen. I'm going to share this one, and hopefully we'll all be seeing the right thing. Let's see. So you mentioned 800 years since you had been an undergraduate, which might, a little bit of hyperbole, but I think one thing you're referencing is that you actually have had a fair amount of time, like living and being in the world and making work before you returned to school as an undergraduate. And so I know that this piece is from the Red series. It's from 2016, so it's still relatively recent, but of course, before you returned to school. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your studio life and your making life before you returned to school.
Well, it was sort of a mixed bag. I was doing teaching. So I've been teaching at art gallery for the city, doing workshops here and there. And I've been doing a fair amount of personal research, traveling, getting a chance to go back to South Africa and study there, going to most recently New Mexico, Santa Fe, studying with some indigenous artists, potters and weavers for the most part, because I was really wanting to make a connection between the Africanness of myself and the indigenousness of myself. Because we didn't really have the teachers and we didn't have the techniques, and there was nobody to really teach us any of these skills while I was in school. They're much better now. They've got a lot more diversity, especially in ceramics departments. It's a lot more outside of either Western or, China, Korea, and Japan. That was the stuff that we studied, which was cool. I just also wanted to know a little bit about African ceramics and indigenous ceramics. So we didn't have anybody for that. So I had to go and do it all myself. So that's what I spent most of my time doing. And this is one of the first pieces where I combined the weaving and the clay. So sort of like bringing both the indigenous heritage and the African heritage together in one piece and trying to see if I can make them fit in a way that seemed, me-ish, something that would fit with me and who I am and who I want to be as an artist. So yeah, this is one of my very first pieces.
So before you made this piece, did you had then a ceramics practice and a weaving or basket making practice that were sort of alongside each other, but not overlapping?
I never wove before I started the series.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
I've never done it before. I was looking through some historical ceramics. I believe it was one of the Chicago Museum collection of African ceramics, and they had some pieces that were ceramics and weaving mixed together. And then I also saw that there was some ceramics and weaving pieces in indigenous ceramics from California. And I was like, whoa, wait, hold on. This is cool. I want to see if I can do that. So I spent the summer teaching myself how to weave, which was interesting. It's super hard actually, but I spent the summer doing it and managed to get like the coil weaving, which is one particular technique. Weaving is like huge. This is just one particular technique that I use. And technically, I don't even think that if you're a fiber person, you call it weaving, call it something else because they're fiber people. And yeah, so I spent the time and I worked on it to try and do that. So I had a ceramics practice where I was making low fire burnished ceramic pieces and tried to sell those and have shows with those. And then I started mixing them together. And I think, yeah, people were pretty interested in those ones, the ones that were mixed together, as well as the weaponized pieces. But,
sure. So teaching yourself weaving or basket making is, where did you start with?
I started at Value Village. I went in and I bought some baskets.
That's such a great answer. I was not expecting you to say Value Village.
I went and found some cheap baskets and I took them apart and I saw how they were made and put together. So once I saw how they were put together, I can reverse engineer them and I can make some of my own. So that's what I did. Traditionally, we'd be using like fiber like grasses, but a lot of the grasses that would be traditionally used for baskets, at least in this area, they're endangered right now. So I felt kind of awkward about going and like destroying the ecosystem so I could make pots that pretty much I just wanted to sell. So I decided to use something that was much more abundant. I used paper. So I'm using hemp cord and paper for most of my weaving, just sort of to reference the weaving that was done traditionally in the area, but at the same time, like, you know, not destroy the planet, because I would feel super bad if I did.
Generally, yeah, generally great if we can avoid that, or the extent to which we can avoid it. So I guess the notion of kind of teaching yourself something touches on I think a way that you speak about your work, which is around recuperation of knowledge, or sort of finding your way into knowledge, and where knowledge resides, and how it's passed on, and how it's developed. And I'm wondering how you were thinking about that. And maybe we could think of it as containing knowledge. So if we're sort of staying to our theme of containment, thinking of this, of course, as a vessel, it's a container. It's not a vessel that's made for water, right? So it's not like it's not a practical particularly, or a functional vessel, but it is containing. And one thing it's containing, I think, is knowledge. And in a way, it's containing that sort of process of yours in a material form of recuperation and rediscovery. So I'm interested in how if that initial step was at Value Village, like, how did you find your way? I mean, it seems like there's a real material practice. It's like a fully material practice, right? In that it was the stuff itself that was helping to show you. Is that right?
I mean, I did a lot of research. We head down to the Manitoba Museum. They have like a pretty great collection of historical ceramics and fiber work. So they exist. You just got to go find them. I was able to take a look at some of the pieces and how those pieces felt, I guess, more than how they looked, because they're old, right? So sometimes they're falling apart and yada, yada. Looking online and finding a lot of different examples of Indigenous and African ceramics or weaving. Same thing with actually in the Caribbean, because my dad's actually Jamaican. But the Caribbean also has a really great tradition of woven material. So looking at some of the historical pieces and some of the contemporary pieces that are based on tradition, and seeing how I can use those techniques without trying to steal somebody's voice, if that makes sense. Because it's not really my culture to borrow from, but if I'm using the techniques and I'm not using the symbolism, I'm not using the iconography, then I feel like I'm justified in borrowing those kinds of things, as long as they're not something that's particularly culturally appropriate to the specific area or specific people. Then I think it's pretty open. I also feel pretty comfortable teaching those things as well. I make it very clear when I'm teaching that it's, you know, that you can use any of the techniques. Like, you can go and dig your own clay, you can make your own stuff, you can coil a pot, you can burnish a pot, you can do all these things, you can weave, but like, don't use like sacred symbols. Like, don't steal these things. Find out what it is that's, you know, culturally important to the people that you're borrowing from, and make sure that you're being respectful of what you're using, what you're borrowing. If it's something that, you know, is really important to them culturally specifically, then don't touch it. Try something else. Come up with your own voice on those kinds of things.
Interesting. So I'm curious how your experiences in South Africa sort of helped to, and your relationship with Zulu ceramics and your research in Zulu ceramics has helped to inform that way of thinking, and whether you identify Zulu ceramics or Zulu culture as being yours in some way, or as being
like not even a little bit. I'm not even remotely. No. I mean, we did my dad's DNA a little while ago. We were like West African, 400 years ago, give or take, somewhere, kind of, I guess, Ghanaian, Nigerian, maybe. But I've been looking so hard on trying to find out more about African ceramics and Indigenous ceramics, and I couldn't find anything. Like, there's nobody to teach. There's nothing on the internet back then. This was like early 2000s.
Right, in the Stone Age.
There's nothing, right? It's not like I could just go on Instagram and like type in like Indian ceramics and they'll show up. It didn't work like that back then. So I ended up going through the anthropology and archaeology department and ended up with like a minor in anthropology, so that I could take these classes on like New World prehistory, New World civilizations, African history, African civilizations, and found myself a professor who specialized in ceramics. That was his thing. So he knew all about African ceramics and New World ceramics, which was great. And I made him be my best friend. And then he offered me a position to go as one of his research assistants while he was studying Zulu pottery in South Africa. So that's how I went to South Africa. It wasn't like it was a personal connection to me. Although, to be fair, I did feel much stronger connection with the potters in South Africa than I did with a lot of the archaeologists. But I think that was just a medium thing, because like, I'm a potter, they're a potter. I'm certainly not a doctorate, like, fancy person. So yeah, I did get a lot better with the potters, because we just made stuff and talked about stuff. So that was really, yeah, really good connections. But I don't feel any particular affinity for Zulu-ness.
Mm. So when we're looking at a work like this, are we seeing you sort of draw from the traditions in some way of Zulu ceramics, the techniques, but specifically not the formal language or the symbolism?
Absolutely. And it's not just Zulu. There's a lot of African ceramics that I've, been looking into. I've only been to South Africa 2 times. I haven't been across the entire continent. But there's a lot of research that has been done, mostly by archaeologists who've done videos and essays and all sorts of things. So I've been reading a lot of those and trying to find out about specific techniques that different people use, and then being able to use those techniques myself in my work. Because there's a lot of ways to coil a pot. It's really kind of astounding how many different ways people coil a pot. Like, it's super common. Every culture in the world has coiled a pot, and every single one does it slightly differently. It's just mind-blowing.
I'd love to ask you one more question about this work before we go to the second piece, which is about sculpture, really, and how you think of this work in relation to the sort of big idea of sculpture, or of modernist sculpture, the idea that there's an object that we're meant to apprehend visually and sort of encounter visually and have a response to. How are you seeing this piece functioning as sculpture rather than as pottery, and is that a distinction for you?
I think it does exist as a sculpture, but I think it also exists as pottery. So I'm just gonna straddle the fence on that. Because as a piece of pottery, it is meant to be engaged with. Like, I spent literal hours burnishing those surfaces, and you just want to rub your face on them. And you can, they feel amazing on your skin. And it's like a disservice to try and separate that kind of encounter from the people that are looking at or engaging with my work. Like, that's 100% the first thing they do is rub the pot and touch the pot and feel the surface. So I kind of have to think of it in terms of a ceramic piece as opposed to a sculpture that's supposed to be observed. It is a fully immersive experience. Like, it smells of the smoke from the fire. It has that beautiful surface. There's the change in textures. There's the variation that the smoke gives the surface. It's a whole package.
Multisensory, yeah.
Multisensory.
Excellent. Let's start looking at the second piece. So this work, Glorification 1 from 2018. Maybe I'll ask you just to start telling us about this work.
Sure. I've been sort of working on a concept of weaponized pottery for a really long time, pretty much since just after I finished my undergrad. And the concept of weaponizing is sort of making your pots so violent or pointy or whatever that they're actually useless for the primary purpose that they were designed, like water pitchers that had blades all over them that make them impossible to pick up and actually use. And it was mostly conversation about how we are dealing with our natural resources, yada yada. So the weaponized pottery has been a thing that I've been working on. And in 2018, actually, I went to the United States to go to a bunch of workshops, got a grant. Went to go work with some potters. It was really fantastic. And there was one workshop that was taking place in El Paso, Texas. So I went out to El Paso and was at a workshop. It was really cool. This really great gallery called Floral del Barro. It was really cool. And that happened to be the same day as the El Paso shooter. Do you remember there's the thing in the Walmart where the guy was just shooting everybody? And it wasn't close to me in any way. It was in the same city, but it wasn't nearby. But I'm also a Canadian, so I don't know how to deal with these kinds of incidents.
With regular mass shootings, yeah.
And they're so chill about it. They're like, oh, it's fine. We'll just turn off the lights and close the blinds. No, just keep working. It's fine. You're fine. And I'm like, but I have to call my mom. Oh my goodness, freaking out. And they were so helpful and so supportive of me and my little Canadianness. And all I wanted to do was go home where people didn't shoot each other all the time. And I just had this, it was so intensely weird. And then when we were talking about it, just this relationship that they have with handguns in the United States. And in Canada, we have a very strong relationship with weapons, but things like, you know, for shooting at bears or like hunting, or, you know, like it's not for usage of like feeling powerful or not feeling vulnerable or whatever. So it's kind of this way of like manipulating a violent object, a weapon, and turning it into something that's almost like a religious experience. Like you put all of your faith into the ownership of this gun, and it's, you know, glorified and it's beautiful, and it in itself is sort of just this thing that you have that makes you feel like you have some control in a world gone mad, I guess. So this was one of the pieces that I was working on to try and wrap my head around this whole experience that I had when I was down there. I don't know if I hit anything that I was feeling or that we had talked about, but I just felt like it was something that I probably should look at. Just the different ways of experiencing gun culture, I guess, like coming from the North and everyone having a gun because they're hunters, to going to the States where people have guns because they just have them because they can, I guess.
And open carry laws too, right? Where they can have them and have them around, like have them.
Weird.
Yeah.
It's just not something that I'm used to at all. Cultural differences.
So would you think that a piece like this would read very differently in the US than in Canada? And how are you thinking about audience in that sense?
I'm actually not entirely sure. I keep having like this vacillation where I think like that the culture between Canada and the United States is very, very similar. And then I'll have like these like big wake up calls where I'm like, no, we're really not. Wow, no, we do not think like that here generally. I mean, some do, of course, like there's a lot of similarities, very closely related culturally, but I don't know how people in the States would read it. Maybe they'd be totally into it and be like, yeah, like guns are cool.
Right.
Let's have like these sculptures of guns. Like, that's great. Or maybe they'll be like stop having opinions on us or whatever, and stop trying to force your weird hippie Canadianness on us or whatever. I have no idea. I try not to overly concern myself with my audience if I can. Like, I don't want to drown myself in making stuff for other people's approval. I think that's too much pressure to put on myself.
Yeah,
so I try to think about how I feel about something, and if I feel good about it, and then if I feel okay about it, then the rest can take care of itself, maybe.
So on this question of Canadianness and Canadian identity, maybe I'll ask you just a really open question about how you think of yourself as a Canadian and that aspect of your identity intersecting with you being a Black woman who grew up in, in a small city in northern Manitoba, where I haven't been there, but I'm imagining there's not a huge Black community in Thompson, Manitoba, and also as a person who identifies as Indigenous as well, thinking about how those different aspects of your identity intersect with each other.
I think that probably I don't want to use the word typical, but it's the amalgamation of different cultural backgrounds into one person is kind of what the Canadian identity is. So, I mean, almost everybody who's not, just arrived in this country is some sort of mix of something. Like, to be fair, most of it's like, Scottish, Irish, and English. But still, there's the area that I live in is very highly like Ukrainian and Polish. So that fits in. But the amalgamation of all these different cultures that you can express and do express and sort of blend together is very Canadian, I think. Mm-hmm. So while I'm doing a lot of exploration about me personally, because I like to make everything about me, by taking, the West Indian culture and the Métis culture and the Indigenous culture and Scottish culture, because I'm Scottish too, and mixing all of that together and expressing it and exploring ideas and trying to get a handle on some of the information I think that has been lost over time. I think that pretty much anybody can go on the exact same journey that I do, just, using their own background as material. It's kind of a thing that is kind of popular right now. So I think everyone should try it out. Just go take a look at what your cultures do. I mean, Grace Nickel just had this big flip out. She found this whole community of potters that were from the area in Europe that her family was from that she had no idea about. She's like, there's a whole school of art that's right here, and I didn't know about it. So that's rad. It's super rad to go and find out all of these things about who your people were and what they were into and what they might still be doing. They might still be making amazing pottery.
Right. But I think also you're bringing it back to a shared experience in a way. And I think one thing you're drawing out in the way you're speaking about this is how we each have our own stories and our own combinations of stories from our backgrounds, but it's also about what we share and how we communicate with each other about these.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that part.
Coming back to this work, I want to think about making and fabrication a little bit. So you spoke in the previous piece about the idea of carrying forward techniques of a given culture, say, or that are broadly based, without carrying forward specific imagery or symbolism. So I can see in this piece, it looks like the vessel, the bottom section of it has been coil constructed in. Likely there's a basket section, and then you have this lid, this sort of extravagant lid with the, I guess, 2 guns, and I'll ask you in a sec, a blade of some kind coming out. And it doesn't look like the guns are coil built. They're probably cast or modeled. So I'm wondering if they are cast, and how you think about the sort of building mechanism for the lid part of this, and how that fits in with the idea of carrying forward techniques.
Well, I don't know. Maybe it is because they are cast. I got some toys and I make plaster molds of the guns and press molds because, slip casting is hard. Yeah, it's something that I learned when I was in school. I mean, I can't abandon all of the knowledge I spent like 5 years getting. Like, it's still pertinent. I mean, sure. I used glaze on this one, and like glaze is like anathema at my house. Like, it's, oh my gosh, Peachy doesn't glaze things, but sometimes glaze is appropriate. And in this particular case, like, I wasn't talking about like a long history of tradition. I was talking about something that's, more modern, something that's happening right now. So I think it's fair to, be using much more contemporary techniques and tools for certain parts of it. It's not the whole vessel, obviously, but I mean, on occasion, there is a time when slip casting and molds and glaze are the appropriate way to go. But it's low fire glaze, though. So balance.
Well, I think everything. I mean, I think maybe it's fair to say that everything is fair in a way. I mean, it's not about making rules or setting up kind of hard and fast boundaries. I think that it's interesting to think about when it does make sense, or what the logic is, say, behind using glaze or behind using a sort of industrially derived technique versus tradition is a complex idea and word and everything, but what we could describe as a traditional technique. So it's not a question of right or wrong, I don't think, but it's a question of kind of when and why, maybe.
Mm-hmm. I think that's in this particular case, like glaze and casting or making molds, not my forte. It's not something that I do a lot, but I mean, I do it each in a Cone 6 studio. I mean, it comes up. It comes up. So it seems like cheating to not use skills that I have and use fairly regularly.
So I think also in this piece, because we're seeing the gun form on here, in some ways the imagery is much more explicit or representational in a sense than in the previous work. And I'm wondering if this body of work was the first time that you started working with more kind of representational imagery, and what that felt like.
Yeah, I feel like it is. I mean, I do kids classes and we make Legos out of clay and stuff like that, but like doing something that looks specifically like something as opposed to a vessel. This was one of my first forays into making something that was representational for like my personal work, not just work that I make for, kids classes or whatever. So yeah, it was like an adventure for sure. Just trying out something that was different and that I felt kind of uncertain about. So yeah, it's like that boundary pushing thing that I am doing like every day now that I'm in grad school, but trying something new. I mean, like, I know how to coil a pot. I know how to burnish a pot. I know how to weave onto a coiled pot. but what else? What else can I do beyond that? Is that all my pots are ever going to be, are coiled and woven burnished pots? Is there something more that I want to talk about, more that I want to say, or do I just want to make pieces that, you know, look really beautiful in people's houses that they just, you know, rub like a Buddha every time they walk past it? Or do I want to have conversation about things? So yeah, that was pretty much when I started really thinking about what do I want to say when I'm making work, as opposed to just learning how to make a good coil pot. That makes sense.
I think it's a really complex question as a maker, actually, when you're, you know, and it's really at the core, I think, of a lot of making of vessels and of pottery in particular, the notion of making a thing, an object, versus a representation of an object, and kind of what, because, you know, like the first piece that we were looking at is not, you know, it's not devoid of content, like it's not absence of content, like it has this like huge kind of heft to it, I think, but it's a very different way of thinking about content than it is with a work like this, which does again have this representational component. It's with the imagery of the guns, it's pointing to something other than itself, as opposed to the previous piece, which is reflective maybe of its internal state of being, which is a void, of course, because it's empty, which is its own thing that maybe we'll put on the side for a moment. So I guess I think that it's I love in this piece that you're, and in the series, because this is one of a series, it seems, is that you're really starting to work with these other sets of questions and seeing how they intersect in a very, in both a literal but also in a metaphoric way with this other, it's almost like a system of representation, right? The thing and then a representational iteration of the thing at the same time.
Pretty much, yeah. It's like the classic potter's conversation. It's like, well, it's a bowl, but a bowl can also be a billion other things, right? So like, where are you going to go with it? So yeah, now I'm going all over the place with it, and it's pretty fun.
Do you think of yourself as a potter? Is there a meaningful distinction between potter and other titles?
You know, I do. I make coil pots. That's what I do. I mean, I know I'm not like a production potter. Like I don't, you know, make 80 of something. But at the end of the day, like I make pots. That's what I make. I mean, maybe my pots look like robots, but they're still pots, right? Like that's just still built the same way, still using the same technique, still using the same voice. It's what I make with it. They're all still vessels. So
let's hold that idea as we talk about your third work that you brought to the table, and maybe just start off by asking you, in what ways is this a pot?
This is still a coil built vessel. Like it's still a vessel. It's a representation vessel, and I'm going a lot more narrative with the work. It's part of a going series in my grad program. But I mean, it's still a vessel. It's still a pot. It's still got the sidge on it. It's burnished, not shiny burnish, but still burnished. It's mixing of medias. It's still smoke fired. Like it's still exactly what I do. I just did it very, very differently. Try. I've never done it before, so it was kind of an experiment to see if I could do it. Like before I get all bogged down in this thesis thing, let's see if I actually can make a representational figure. And I think I did. It looks like a person, kind of. So yeah.
Yeah, I think very much so. If that was one of the goals, for sure. I mean, can you tell us about the character, maybe, or about the person?
For sure. Liberté is based on the painting by Delacroix, Liberty Leaving the People, which is about the French Revolution. But right about the time that I was working on this, we were having tons of demonstrations and riots and whatnot. And in France, they actually had a riot, because French people like to riot. They're good at rioting. That's their thing. It's just what they do. But there had been an event where a police officer had beaten a black man, and then they tried to change the law to make it illegal for people to videotape the police beating people. And the French people were not having that because they don't put up with that kind of stuff. And so there was like this whole thing that was happening, and there was a lot of use of the Liberty figure in representing like their revolt or their resistance to this kind of lawmaking. So I thought it was kind of apt. Like, I doubt that they did it just for me, but it fit with the theme that I was working at the time. So thank you, France. Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot this year about, how we are dealing with these uprisings, these events that have been going on in the news, especially with your Black, brown, or queer, and a girl, that's too, and especially how it happens when you're existing in digital spaces, because that's kind of my jam right now, is how we exist in digital space and how we sort of rectify that with how we exist in the real world. Since we've been on the pandemic, digital space is not just a nothing space. It actually is a big part of our life.
Yeah, our most space. Yeah.
It's a huge deal. So things that do happen in digital space, have a huge impact on what happens in the world. And I think that's really always been the case, but we didn't notice until like the pandemic. And all of a sudden we're like, oh my gosh, stuff that I do on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or Reddit actually have real world impacts. And some of them are, people trying to take over the White House, or, putting together all these Twitter revolts, like where everybody just has these meetings and then go and do protests on a moment's notice. Like, it's a whole different world dealing with digital space and how it is to exist in these digital spaces, especially if you're a person of color or a queer person. It's a very different experience. You're not the default, heterosexual cis white dude from California that everyone seems to think you are online. If you don't specifically say, I am not a white guy from California, click. Yeah, so it's a very different experience. And I'm really interested on how, we rationalize the people that we are in digital spaces versus who we are in real life. We still tend to think of it as different, and they're really not. So are you the good guy, the bad guy? Which guy are you? That's where I'm going with that. And this is one of my figures that's like my online one of my digital warriors. Yeah.
Amazing. I have 100 questions now based on what you just said. No, that was really great. I guess I'm curious what are the, I don't want to say platforms because I don't mean it that literally, but what are the digital environments that you find for you are allowing a different kind of voice to emerge, or a different way of thinking to emerge?
Well, I guess none of them / all of them. What really brought about this whole conversation was when I was chatting with some of my cohort at grad school, and I was talking about how on Reddit I had different personalities for going to different kinds of subreddits. So I really like science fiction and fantasy, but you can't go to science fiction and fantasy being a brown girl. Like, that's just ridiculous. They're going to murder you and you'll get nothing but like X-rated pictures and death threats. So I have an avatar where I don't mention race in any, or gender in any way, so that I can, go and find out about science fiction books or like Marvel movies or whatever without getting doxxed and harassed. And nobody else did. Like, nobody else in my cohort had these different personalities for when they just wanted to mind their business online. So I started thinking about like how different these experiences are. So depending on how you've chosen to present yourself, any site can be okay. I mean, if you have an avatar that says that you are not, ethnic or whatever, then it's fine. But you have days when you want to be like the keyboard warrior and go out and be like, I want to fight bigotry on Twitter. So you go and fight bigotry on Twitter until you get tired and realize you're not really helping anything. And then, you can switch to a different one where you're just like, yeah, I just want to like follow what the Kardashians are doing today or whatever. Like, sometimes you feel like being militant and saving the world, and sometimes you don't. And when you're a person of color, there's this expectation that you're always going to be like fighting the good fight and educating people and helping, I don't know, being the super duper magical Negro, I guess, and helping all the white people realize how they've gone wrong, and then just sort of fading into the background because you have no agency of your own. And like, there's an expectation that you're going to do that. And sometimes you don't want to. Sometimes you just want to, like, I don't know, talk about Futurama or
read science fiction books.
Right?
Yeah.
And like, I feel like sometimes I just want the piece to do that in digital space. And I know I'm not all alone. I know that a lot of people do it. So yeah, I'm interested in how we explore those things, how we reconcile those things with ourselves. Sometimes we're not good people online. Sometimes we're terrible people online. We're not fighting the good fight. Sometimes we're just picking fights because we can. And no one knows who we are.
Yourself included, would you say?
No, not really. I've gotten into some arguments online with my racist uncle or something, whatever, and fought the fight well beyond the point when it should have been stopped, and I just kept going at it. So I guess kind of, because it's not really the platform to have nuanced conversations about huge social issues that can't be changed in a minute. So I guess maybe I am sometimes the bad guy when I'm really harping on an issue that I know I can't make any headway on. So I guess we all do that. Yeah, sometimes. I try not to, though.
So coming back to the artwork here that we're looking at, you described this as, I think, your digital or your virtual warrior, and I'm curious, how it was important for you to bring her into the physical world, if she came into being in some way in the virtual world.
More of a way of looking at how we are engaging each other in digital space. So the entire show that I'm envisioning once my project is finished is sort of a conversation of the different kinds of relationships and interactions we have in digital spaces. So she's like the ringleader, the one who inspires the people to go and fight the good fight, whatever the good fight might be on that particular occasion. So I'm trying to make a digital space talk about modern and future technology while using the lowest technology that is possible to use in ceramics, which I think is also pretty fun. Yeah, that kind of explodes brains sometimes.
I think there's this great way with the three works that you've chosen to talk about today, not to oversimplify it, but it has one dimension that connects the three of them, is this idea of past, present, and future, right? That the first work was kind of thinking about what these traditions of making were and how you individually connected to them. And the second piece with the guns, is, I think, reflecting in a little bit more of an explicit way on the present and your experience in El Paso, as you've described it. And then this piece is thinking about building a different kind of a future, which is a really compelling way of thinking and understanding about your work and your progression through your work.
Thanks.
I think also for this one, when I look at it, I'm thinking about that basket component too, and thinking about how vessels and baskets kind of are weaving, intersect with each other, and the kind of bodice piece of this work is, it's basket-like in a way. I wouldn't say it's woven exactly. It's more like, well, it's armor in a sense, and maybe that's where the question is around armor and the idea of armor. And I know you've been making helmets as well, and thinking about sort of if you have been thinking about weaponization for a long time, and now you're thinking a bit about armor, how do those connect to each other? And where's the armor come from?
Well, mostly my armor is sort of a exploration of how the anonymity that we explore, we engage with in digital spaces isn't really all of that great. My armor is made out of paper and ceramics. There's nothing protective about that. It's low fire ceramics. This will not help you at all. It is fire to O10. It's practically nothing. It's like eggshells. It's like these fortresses of soap bubbles that we put on ourselves to hide and feel safe or feel like the hero of these stories. But it's not really armor. It will not protect you from anything. So that's where I'm going with that. Okay? My clay armor, my suits of clay armor that are, just sort of an idea of protection. They don't actually do anything. So.
But that's, in a way, that's what virtual armor is, right? That's the whole idea of armor, is the notion that it's almost magical. It's that kind of idea of you said earlier, the magical Black person. It's that idea that you're magical in some way. And if you just decide that you're invincible, then you have armor. And I think also it calls to mind the notion of avatars and sort of multiple identities, and using those as armor in some way, or as deflectors. There's sort of a function of armor that's a deflecting function too.
It's really fun thinking about like different aspects of self, different aspects of time, the non-linearity of time. All of that sort of stuff is sort of, yeah, that's all from Megan Sinclair's class right there. About, if he's watching, thank you, dude, that was amazing. Yeah, about how we can blend in all of these different concepts of who we are now, who we are then, who we are in space, who we are in the real world, and having them all blend together, and not necessarily super well, like, right? Like,
or logically, maybe.
Or
yeah,
logically, like, yeah. Like sometimes they don't really fit well, but that's who we are. And sometimes it's not a pretty package, right? Or a completely perfected, polished package. Sometimes it's haphazard. Sometimes it's thrown together.
Thrown together, for sure. I love the idea of you kind of making pots, probably sitting on the ground in South Africa, like, you know, very kind of in it, like with dirty hands, not dirty, but like clay-filled hands. And then, you know, from there also having the kind of thinking that has led to this piece, which is, you know, virtual, engaged, very much at the moment, and that you're doing such a great job at keeping all of these in conversation with each other.
Thank you. Yeah, I had a conversation with Grace Nickel when I was starting out, and she's like, well, you're supposed to be pushing the envelope. You mean you already know how to make a coil pot, right? So you're in grad school, do something really ridiculous. I'm like, all right, this is about as far out as I can see myself going right now. Like full-sized wearable armor made out of ceramic and paper. Like I can't think of anything that's beyond that. That is about as far out as I can get.
You know, I think the other thing you're doing in this figurative piece is the idea of weaving as hair, like hair weaving too, like kind of obviously is like a big part of how that kind of comes into the conversation.
It took forever.
Yeah, that's the downside. But so we have just a few minutes left. I do want to turn to some questions that have come in from the participants. So I'll just kind of go through them. So one is asking about the red series. So I'll scroll back to that and wondering whether you punch holes in the vessels before firing, or I imagine it's before rather than after. And if you could speak a bit more about the weaving material, if you.
Sure. I do it before when it's still in the leather hard stage. You have to make them a little bit bigger than you think you're going to need because you have your shrinkage to deal with. And then there's also like the terrassage and whatnot that you have to put later. So you want to make sure your holes are big enough so they don't get closed. And I'm using a paper that is used mostly for caning, like making furniture. So like Danish cord or I don't remember what the just plain one is, but it's just like craft paper that's like tightly twisted. You can get it in some colors, like black and white, but mostly black, white, and craft paper color. Yeah.
Great.
You can get it at Lee Valley.
Another question around more images of your pieces, and I'll just say that you have a website, PJ Anderson, you're on Facebook. There's a quick Google would open up lots more images. Question about Liberté and asking whether it is life size.
She is slightly less than life size, very, very close to life size. And she's only like, you know, to the super short because she has legs. But yeah, life size-ish.
Excellent. So I was coming back to the red series, question, a wonderful comment about how beautiful and elegant the piece is, and asking about the reflectivity of it and sort of how reflective is it, and that relates to the burnishing, and maybe you could speak more about the kind of the surface quality there.
It's incredibly reflective. It's incredibly difficult to shoot most of these pictures, or yeah, just because of how like highly reflective the surface is because of the burnishing. But yeah, it's just done with, I have my favorite rock. This one has some terrassage on there. I think about 10 or 11 layers. It's a red terrassage. And I use some baby oil on the surface, wait for it to get sucked in, then start burnishing, go around the whole thing, then do it again, and then do it again, and then do it again. Yeah, it takes a really long time. Like you should just watch the entire series of Gilmore Girls while you're burnishing. It's what I do.
It's so funny. I actually just started watching Gilmore Girls for the first time in my life.
It's so great. Like,
it's
what do
weird.
people even do in their studios when they're not watching Gilmore Girls? I don't understand.
It's weirdly satisfying in this very like odd way. Yeah. Oh, that's so funny. So a question back to Liberté, and I think it's easier for, I'll just read this. So this is coming from Heidi McKenzie, who you likely know. And Heidi's asking, I wonder if you can elaborate on how your work Liberté was informed by the knowledge that this was going to be a digital space work. Would you have made different creation or technique choices if we were not in the COVID digital space?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a hard one, Heidi. I think that I probably would have made it the same. I mean, admittedly, I've been spending a lot more time digitally. I don't know if I would have been inspired to do an entire series about the existence or how we live and work in digital spaces as, you know, brown, black, or queer people. If we hadn't had that one conversation in my graduate seminar. So I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. It's informed by the digital space mostly because, like, you can't see it, but she will have accessories later on that will include some references to digital space. Yeah, if we had not been in COVID, I don't know that I would have come up with this project. I don't know that I would have.
It's really great to have a question that you can't answer about a current body of work, I think, because that sort of suggests that you're still making it in a way, and you seem clearly to work in series, so that there's, you know, you're still kind of in there thinking. So we'll check back on this one.
I have not yet worked out completely, which I don't know.
Stay tuned for episode 2. Yeah. So another question around reference material for coiling, approaches to coiling, sort of different cultural techniques for coiling. Off the top of your head, do you have any that you kind of go to that you suggest for folks that would?
References of who's amazing coilers?
No, sort of historical or cultural traditions of coiling. Is there a source that kind of lays it out by culture or approach?
I don't think that there's like an omnibus of like coiled pottery, but there are a whole bunch in Africa, north, south, east, west, all over Africa. Japan has a coiling tradition. China has a coiling tradition. India still has a coiling tradition right now. A lot of the Southeast Asia does, North America, South America, the Caribbean, like pretty much everywhere. Yeah. Everywhere has a coiling tradition. If you just take a look at historical pottery, I mean, it's one of the first ways that we ever made a pot, one of the first. So it's pretty easy. If you look up coiled pottery by country or by whatever, you should have a ton.
You know, I'll maybe add that one of the other first ways of making pots was pressing clay into a basket, right? And then firing it by burning away the basket. So that's another something I've been thinking about with your work. So maybe a final question to wrap us up is asking what direction your work is heading in now in that balance of figuration and vessel.
I'm currently, as in right this very second, working on a full-sized wearable suit of armor made out of clay and paper. Yeah, I wasn't even joking. You thought I was joking, but I wasn't even joking. A full-size wearable suit of armor. So that's my project, one of my projects for the summer. And I'm also making a full-size keyboard warrior. But keyboard warrior, get it? I'm hilarious. So I'm also doing that. Those are my goals to get finished before September.
Excellent. And where can people find images of those? Where should we direct them? Instagram, Facebook, your website?
Instagram would probably be, like, I'm pretty good at updating my Instagram. So if you want to take a look at PJ Anderson's.
Okay.
All my stuff.
Very good. Thank you so much, PJ, for joining us. It's been really a treat to talk to you. It's been great to learn more about your work. I wish you the best for a fantastic summer.
Thank you.
Come to when we can travel again, come to Toronto. We have some African pots that have come into the collection recently that love for you to be able to look at and think about a little bit. And of course, lots of other objects at the museum, but I'm sure you have great things there in Winnipeg too. So thank you again. Be well. Folks who are participating, thanks for joining us. Gardner Museum is still closed to the public, but you can tune in for some more digital programming in the coming weeks. So thanks again. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
Bye. Bye.